Imagine you are asleep in AD 1666 and the city breathes around you like a living thing made of timber ribs and tarred rope veins. You see black beams above your bed, dry as old bone. You hear a cartwheel in the lane, a drunk's laugh, a shutter knocked loose. You feel safe for one last heartbeat because London is always loud, always cramped, always alive. But a sound tears through the dark that does not belong to ordinary life. A bell erupts, violent, urgent, hammered again and again until the noise becomes a command. You feel your stomach drop. You see a window flash orange. Therefore, your feet hit the floor before your mind catches up. Imagine yanking on your clothes with fingers that suddenly fumble. You smell smoke, thin at first, like a warning. But it thickens with each breath. You see neighbors in the passage, half-dressed, faces stretched tight. Someone shouts a word that freezes the blood, fire. You push into the lane and the night is no longer night. It is a corridor of shadows sprinting toward a glow. You see people pouring out of doorways, clutching bundles, dragging chests that slam against cobbles. You feel the press of bodies, the shove of elbows, the panic that makes strangers into obstacles. You run toward the brightness because the bell orders you to, because the city has rules even in terror. Find the blaze, stop it, save your street. But the street itself fights you, too narrow, too crowded, overhanging upper floors leaning like conspirators, almost touching across the lane. You see how a flame can jump here as easily as a handshake. Therefore, you run harder. The closer you get, the more the air changes. Smoke stops being a smell and becomes a weight. You cough and it hurts. Your eyes water until the world blurs. You see people bent forward as if under invisible loads. You turn a corner and there it is, Pudding Lane. A bakery is vomiting fire like a beast that cannot stop feeding. You see shutters glowing red. You see flames licking out of windows and crawling upward like it is cloth. You feel heat punch your face, not warm, violent, like an opened oven held to skin. Someone screams that the Lord Mayor must order houses pulled down. Someone else screams back that it is madness, families inside, livelihoods inside, property bought with a lifetime of labor. You feel the crowd split into two forces that hate each other in the same instant, save the home, or sacrifice it to save the city. But debate costs seconds, therefore the fire takes those seconds like coins. You see sparks whirl above the bakery roof, rising, twisting, searching. The wind rises and it does not simply blow, it aims. You feel it on your cheeks, hot and dry, like the city's breath turning against itself. Embers leap the lane and land on nearby roofs like lit arrows. You watch one stick smolder, then bite. Therefore, the blaze is no longer a house fire. It becomes a moving army. Imagine being shoved into a bucket chain because your hands are free and your life depends on the person beside you. You see leather buckets passed hand to hand, water sloshing, wrists straining. You feel a brief surge of purpose. This looks like salvation. But the first throw hits flame and turns to steam with a hiss that sounds like laughter. Therefore, heroism becomes mathematics. The bucket holds too little against an enemy that eats houses. You sprint to the Thames with others because someone shouts that the river is the only endless source. You see the waterline crowded with frantic figures, skirts lifted, boots slipping, arms plunging buckets down. You feel the shock of cold water against hot hands. You turn and run back and the bucket slaps your leg, spilling half its hope onto the street. Your lungs burn with smoke. Your thighs burn with effort. You reach the line and throw. The fire does not retreat. It climbs, it spreads, it uses the overhanging floors as bridges. Therefore you run again, because stopping feels like surrender. Orders come in broken fragments like torn paper. A runner barrels through, shouting that the mayor is coming, therefore hold. Another crashes in from another street, shouting the mayor refuses to authorize demolition because property matters, therefore keep throwing water. You don't know which voice carries truth. You only know your mouth tastes like soot and your eyes sting so badly tears turn gritty. You see burning thatch lift into the air, ripped free by wind, spinning like a black star with an orange heart. It sails and lands beyond your line. For a breath it rolls. Then it opens into a new mouth of flame. You feel dread because now there is no single front. Therefore the blaze becomes a swarm, many fires, many directions, too many to chase with buckets. Someone thrusts a hook into your hands. You see iron teeth, heavy and brutal. You feel its weight, the way it pulls your shoulder down. A man shouts to pull down the next building to create a break. You see rope tossed over beams. You hear wood creak as bodies lean back to strain. But the crowd hesitates. Half pull, half plead. A woman grabs a sleeve and screams that her bed is upstairs, that her husband's papers are inside, that God will curse anyone who tears down a home. Therefore the rope trembles, the hook slips, the moment dies. You feel rage flare because the fire does not hesitate. You shove back into the rope line. You plant your boots on cobbles slick with spilled water and dropped belongings. You pull until your teeth grit. You see the timber frame groan. Nails scream. A wall bows. But it holds, stubborn, proud, built to stand, therefore refusing to become the sacrifice that saves others. Night deepens, but the blaze turns it into an unnatural noon. You see faces only when they pass near flame, eyes wide, cheeks streaked with ash, lips cracked from heat. You feel the crush of people moving in every direction at once. Some run toward the fire to fight, but more run away from it with whatever can be carried. Therefore the street becomes a river of fleeing lives. You stumble into a man hauling a chest. The corner catches a door frame and stops dead. He tries to wrench it free. You see his knuckles whiten. You hear him pant like an animal. But the smoke thickens, therefore he abandons it and runs, leaving the chest like a tombstone in the lane. You see a woman carrying a child wrapped in a blanket that already smells of smoke. You hear the child cough, small, wet, terrifying. You feel a flash of helplessness because water and rope cannot protect lungs. Therefore you grab the hook again and force your body back toward the heat. The wind surges. Flames begin to jump whole streets. You see fire bloom on rooftops that no bucket line reaches. You realize the city layout itself is a weapon against you. Tight lanes become wind tunnels, overhangs become bridges, warehouses stuffed with oil, pitch, cloth, and spirits become ammunition stores waiting for a spark. Therefore, every step feels late. Imagine rounding a corner and finding a new inferno where there is supposed to be safety. You see a shop front collapse inward, spilling burning beams into the street. You feel the heat push you back, forcing your arms up to shield your face. You smell tar melting. You taste ash so thick it feels like eating the city. Someone yells for ladders. Someone yells for axes. Someone yells for the trained men of the parish. But trained men are just men, therefore panic spreads through the ranks. You see a line break as people turn and run, eyes wild, because the fire roars like something alive. A new order surges through the crowd, pull down houses or London dies. But the authority to do it is uncertain. You see parish officers arguing, pointing, shouting. You feel the brutal truth. There is no time for permission. Therefore hands start to act without it. You and others throw ropes around a beam of a house that stands in the fire's path. You feel the rope bite into your palm. You lean back with your weight. You see the beam flex. But the building does not fall quickly. Therefore the fire catches the next roof while you wrestle this one. Imagine the moment when the enemy's next move becomes obvious. You see embers streaming like a living cloud toward the heart of the city. You feel certainty in your bones. If the blaze reaches the warehouses and the crowded markets, it becomes unstoppable. But how do you prove it to men who hear only screams and crackling wood? Therefore you shout until your throat tears, and still faces look through you as if through smoke. The decisive minute arrives at a line of houses that must fall. Behind you, families beg, hands clasped, knees in the filth, crying that everything they own sits behind those doors. Ahead of you, a roaring front crawls closer, devouring the street with patient hunger. You feel the moral weight like a stone in your gut. Tear down a home with living memories inside, or let the fire take the whole city. A messenger slams through the crowd, eyes wide, voice breaking. Gunpowder is coming. Explosions, controlled violence to clear space faster than ropes. You feel fear spike because gunpowder belongs to war, not neighborhoods. Another voice shouts that it will kill everyone standing here. But the fire already kills by inches, therefore the powder begins to sound like mercy. Heat becomes a physical force. You feel it pulling moisture from your mouth until your tongue sticks. Your skin prickles as if needles press into it. You blink and your lashes feel brittle. You taste ash, and in that taste sits the city's future, either smoke or survival. You grab the rope again and wrap it around your forearm because bare hands slip. You feel fibers bite skin. You pull until your shoulder screams. You see the wall buckle. It stalls. The crowd surges backward as the roof catches and collapses inward with a crack like a giant snapping a plank over a knee. For one heart-stopping second, you think you win. You see open space where a wall stands. You hear cheering mixed with sobbing. But the wind throws a fresh storm of embers over the gap and ignites the next row. Therefore, the fire adapts. It hunts continuity like a predator seeking the next stepping stone. Panic surges. Someone trips and disappears under feet. You feel hands claw your sleeve for balance. You yank free and almost fall yourself. You see a cart overturn, spilling household goods, pots, linens, a clock, into the street like an offering to chaos. But nothing distracts the blaze, therefore all that treasure becomes fuel in waiting. Then the explosions begin. You hear a deep thump, not like thunder, tighter, sharper, man-made. The shockwave slaps your chest. You hit the ground hard enough to jar teeth. You smell sulfur. You taste dust. You see a house burst outward into splinters and smoke. Therefore, a raw wound of open space appears where a street used to be. You scramble up, ears ringing. You see men hauling more powder, faces smeared, eyes squinting against heat. You feel awe and terror at the same time because the city now fights fire with war. But the fire is still there, therefore you watch it reach the gap and hesitate, as if confused by emptiness. It searches for a bridge. Embers float, probing. A roof beam falls short and burns out. You hold your breath. You feel your heartbeat in your throat. If the embers find purchase, the gap becomes meaningless. Therefore, everyone stares at the far side like gamblers watching a spinning wheel. For a moment, the space holds. You see flame lick the edge and fail to leap. You hear a sound you almost forget exists, human voices that are not screaming, but shouting in coordination. But the wind does not die, therefore the struggle continues street by street, gap by gap, explosion by explosion. Imagine the city turning into a maze of decisions. You see a man with a parish badge ordering another demolition. You see a homeowner swing at him with a stick. You feel the blow glance off someone's shoulder. But fists cannot fight a blaze, therefore the crowd's anger turns into frantic labor again. You move with a group toward another threatened line. You see carts jam the lane, loaded with bedding, mirrors, sacks of grain, crates of books. You feel the pressure of people trying to squeeze past one another. But the lanes are too tight, therefore movement slows into choking gridlock. A shout goes up, the bridge, save the bridge. You see heads turn toward the river's crossing, that vital artery. You feel a surge of dread because if fire takes the crossing, the city splits, escape routes collapse, supplies fail. Therefore bodies pour that way. The closer to the river, the more the air shakes with heat. You see sparks fall onto the water and die with a hiss. You see boats overloaded with families, chests, cages of squawking birds. You feel the river become both lifeline and trap. But not everyone can fit, therefore cries rise as boats push off and leave hands reaching from the bank. You see a man clutching papers to his chest as if ink can stop flame. You see another dragging a painting wrapped in cloth. You feel the strange priorities of terror, save what can be carried, because what cannot be carried is already gone. Therefore the streets fill with fragments of lives, moving away from a growing absence. Night cycles into a deeper nightmare. You see the sky glow red behind smoke, so thick it hides stars. You feel grit settle into your hair, your eyebrows, your teeth. But exhaustion does not end the fire, therefore bodies keep moving until legs shake and minds blur. Imagine trying to sleep for a minute on a doorstep, only to jolt awake as another roof collapses nearby. You hear the crash like a cannon. You feel the ground tremble. You see sparks drift toward you. Therefore you stand again and stumble onward, because stillness equals burning. Rumor darts through the crowd faster than feet. Someone swears foreigners set the blaze. Someone swears it is divine wrath. You feel suspicion twist faces into masks. But the enemy is not a person in the shadows, therefore chasing scapegoats wastes breath you need to breathe. Still, fear needs a target. You see a stranger grabbed by the collar, shoved against a wall. You hear accusations spit like embers. You feel how quickly a city under threat turns on itself. But the fire keeps advancing, therefore even that violence dissolves as people run again. The hardest part is not the heat, it is the choices. You see a woman at her threshold, refusing to leave, arms spread like a shield for a home made of dry wood. You feel the urge to drag her away. But touching her means force, therefore you shout until she finally turns, tears cutting clean lines through soot as she runs. You reach another demolition site. Men stack powder in a cellar. You see them wet cloth and tie it over their mouths. You feel your own fear sharpen because one spark ends everyone here. But the blaze is already a certainty. Therefore, the powder feels like a last tool left in a broken box. The fuse goes. You see someone sprint away, hunched low. You hear the explosion punch air. You feel the shock slap your ribs again. Timber rains down. You duck and cover your head. Therefore, the street transforms in a blink, house gone, debris scattered, open space carved by force. The fire reaches the new gap and falters. You see tons of flame wave as if tasting for a path. You feel hope, thin as a thread, but real. But embers still drift, therefore buckets fly to douse any tiny ignition on the far side. Someone screams that a church roof catches. You see the cross silhouette against flame. You feel a jolt of grief because sacred stone and timber cannot argue with physics. But prayer does not smother embers, therefore men scramble up with hooks to rip burning pieces free before the whole structure becomes a torch. The city's heart feels exposed. You see streets you know vanish behind curtains of smoke. You feel disorientation because landmarks disappear, shops, signs, familiar corners. But bodies keep flowing, therefore navigation becomes instinct. Move away from heat, move toward open ground, move toward water. Morning tries to arrive. But dawn does not look like gold, it looks like a dim bruise behind smoke. You see light seep through a ceiling of ash. You feel your exhaustion become heavy as armor. Therefore, every step is slower, but still taken. You walk through drifting ash that falls like gray snow. Your boots crunch glass. You see a church bell hanging silent, cracked or abandoned. You feel the eerie wrongness of quiet patches between roaring fronts. But silence does not mean safety, therefore your head keeps turning, hunting for the next flare. You look at the cost in real time. You see people sleeping in open fields at the city's edge, wrapped in whatever they carry. You feel the rawness of displacement, thousands of lives reduced to bundles. Merchants stare at empty hands where shops stand. Therefore, wealth becomes smoke, status becomes ash, and survival becomes the only currency. The skyline is wrong. You see familiar spires missing, replaced by columns of smoke. You feel a hollow punch in the chest because a city is also memory made visible. But memory cannot rebuild itself, therefore the mind starts counting what remains. The river, the stone shells, the stubborn will to continue. The fire is not only destruction. It is a verdict on how London is built. You see timber packed tight like matchsticks. You see streets too narrow for carts to turn, too crowded for lines to form. You feel fury at hesitation, at the precious minutes spent arguing over property, while flame gathers strength. Therefore, the lesson burns itself into everyone who survives. Design can kill. Imagine stepping back for a single clear breath, time detective eyes wide, mind racing even as lungs ache. You see the city that is born from this nightmare forming in the imagination like a blueprint drawn in smoke. Wider streets, fewer overhangs, brick and stone favored over hungry wood. Organized insurance taking shape because loss demands calculation. Fire brigades emerging because chaos proves too expensive. Therefore, urban design stops being mere beauty and becomes survival engineering. You see why modern streets insist on access, why codes demand spacing, why hydrants and fire breaks matter, why certain materials are forbidden. You feel the invisible hand of AD 1666 gripping the present by the collar. But paperwork never feels heroic, therefore people forget the blood and breath behind the rules until the next siren. The verdict arrives as the flames finally weaken, not because courage wins, but because space, exhaustion of fuel, and harsh choices corner the blaze. You see neighborhoods reduced to black skeletons. You feel the weight of what is gone: homes, shops, churches, the small private worlds that make a city human. Therefore, the cost is counted in cold emptiness, families without roofs, streets without names, a capital forced to reinvent itself while still coughing out smoke. Now the mirror lifts. You see a modern city with its bright windows and confident towers, but you also see its hidden tinder, shortcuts in construction, cramped housing, neglected infrastructure, leaders afraid to order painful sacrifices. Crowds desperate for someone to blame. You feel the uncomfortable question press in: when safety demands loss today, does hesitation still win the first hours for disaster? But disasters do not wait for consensus. Therefore, the same pattern lurks beneath new materials. The legacy question sits in your hands like a hot coal that cannot be dropped. You feel it burn because it is not about London anymore. Imagine standing in a street where a hard choice must be made: tear down something precious to stop a spreading threat, or protect it and risk everything beyond it. You see faces pleading on both sides. You hear the bell that means someone's life is already burning. Therefore, the question becomes personal. When the alarm sounds in your own time, what do you sacrifice first: comfort, property, pride, or the illusion that someone else will decide?